Have you ever wondered what truly happened when the sun dipped below the medieval horizon? When the marketplace fell silent, and the flicker of torches replaced daylight? Before we wander into the shadows of that world, give yourself a moment, tap the like button, let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and subscribe so you do not miss any of these midnight secrets. Only if you are ready, of course. Now, let us step into the darkness together. The medieval night was not a gentle place. For men of the Middle Ages, sunset did not simply mean rest. It was the beginning of another life entirely. One hidden from priests, from wives, from the judgment of the daytime world. Under torchlight, the streets became narrow rivers of mystery, carrying whispers, laughter, and sometimes blood. You might imagine silence dominating, but no, the night was alive with drunken songs, secret footsteps, and the creak of doors opening into places you were never meant to see. Picture a small town in 13th century England. By day it looked ordinary. A church bell, a blacksmith's hammer, children chasing hens through the mud. But once darkness came, men gathered behind barns and in forgotten alleys. A torch, lifted high, was not just light. It was a signal. The glow revealed faces that in daylight might look respectable: merchants, apprentices, even clerks. But here, with shadows dancing across their features, they became something else entirely. They became seekers of thrill, of power, of forbidden brotherhood. The torch carried a language of its own. A single torch by the river could mean a meeting. 2 torches near the gate might be a warning. A circle of torches in the forest. That was something darker. These signals spread like rumors, faster than church edicts or royal decrees. And if you followed them, you might stumble into a ritual so secret that even speaking of it the next day could cost your tongue. Now imagine yourself there. The air is damp, carrying the scent of hay, sweat, and unwashed bodies. The torch smokes and sparks fall dangerously close to straw. A group of men encircle the flame, each with faces half hidden. One whispers an oath, another spits into the fire, and yet another laughs nervously. What would you do standing in that ring? Would you swear loyalty to strangers bound by fire? Would you trust them to guard your secrets? Or would you turn and run, knowing that cowards were remembered not by name but by shame? It was not only about courage. These torchlit gatherings often masked plans, plots against landlords, conspiracies against rival guilds, or simple agreements of protection. Sometimes they were about love, yes, love. Men would confess affairs, hopes, or sins under the forgiving cover of the night flame, and sometimes, if luck turned cruel, they were about punishment. A thief caught stealing bread might find himself tied before the torch, his fate decided by shadows and whispers. But not everything was grim. The medieval torchlight also flickered with humor. Jests flew like sparks. One man might pretend to trip dramatically into the mud, causing the whole circle to erupt in laughter. Another might challenge a friend to recite a prayer backward while drinking ale from a cracked skull cup. Strange, yes. But remember, in a world without television, these moments were both comedy and bonding ritual. The science of fire itself gave the torch a mystical aura. Scholars of the time believed flame carried divine breath, a fragment of the sun. Holding a torch was not only practical, it was spiritual. It was warmth against the chill, but also a ward against demons believed to prowl after midnight. Even today, historians find burned symbols on wood beams near meeting sites. Marks that might have been charms to keep evil away, or perhaps to invite it in. The question for you is, if you lived in that time, would you be brave enough to follow the torches into the forest? Would curiosity drag you closer? Or would fear of the unknown freeze your steps? One thing is certain, the medieval man's night was never empty. It pulsed with danger, laughter, secrecy, and temptation, each flame telling a story no daylight could reveal. The fire crackles, and voices lower. In the glow of a single torch, men huddle closer, their faces painted by flame and shadow. You can almost hear it. The dry whisper of an oath spoken in secrecy, a vow that must never meet the ears of daylight. Imagine being there, pressed between strangers who might tomorrow be friends, or enemies, but tonight, in this firelit circle, they demand loyalty. Oaths were the currency of medieval nights. To swear was not just to speak. It was to bind your soul. Men would promise silence about plans whispered in barns, protection against rival guilds, or vengeance against an enemy lord. Sometimes they swore to keep affairs of the heart hidden, confessing sins under the cloak of fire, begging the group for understanding or forgiveness. If you were inside that circle, could you share your deepest secret? Picture a man kneeling, his hand hovering above the flames. He murmurs words that sound half prayer, half threat. Another pricks his palm with a dagger, letting a bead of blood hiss as it hits the fire. Smoke rises, curling like a spirit. Was it superstition? Yes, but to them it was binding. A broken oath was not just shameful, it was dangerous. Betrayal meant curses, exile, or worse, an end no priest could absolve. Science today tells us that fire releases chemicals that trigger memory and calm the mind. Back then, men believed it burned truth into the air, carried upward to God or downward to demons. Either way, the oath became sacred. The fire listened, and when fire listens, who dares lie? But not every vow was solemn. Some were playful, ridiculous even. A young apprentice might swear never to shave until he won a girl's kiss, while others laughed and toasted his foolishness. Another might promise to carry his drunk friend home every night for a month, a pact met with cheers. In those moments, oaths were not just about survival. They were about laughter, about belonging, about proving you mattered to the group. Yet the most chilling vows were those tied to blood. Men cut their palms, pressing them together so blood mingled. They whispered of loyalty until death, of unity stronger than family. It sounds dramatic now, but in a world where war, famine, and plague could strike without warning, such bonds were survival. Your brother in blood was the one who stood with you when everything else burned away. So what about you? Would you prick your skin, let your blood fall into the fire, knowing you could never take it back? Would you trust these men with your life, or fear that one day they might demand more than you could give? Oaths shaped medieval knights, carving invisible chains between men. Some chains were light, made of jokes and laughter. Others were iron, forged in secrecy and fear, and when the fire burned low, those chains clinked in the silence, binding souls tighter than daylight ever could. The night deepens. Somewhere in the town bells lie silent, but here in the hidden dark a brotherhood is born. Not of family, not of bloodlines, but of choice. Imagine a group of men, hoods pulled low, voices hushed, gathering not for worship, but for something more dangerous, belonging that defies the daylight world. Secret brotherhoods were the skeleton of medieval society. Some historians call them informal guilds, others night fraternities. To the men inside, they were simply survival. You joined not because you wanted adventure, but because without a brotherhood, you stood alone. Alone meant weak. Weak meant prey, and no one wanted to be prey. In these circles, rules bent like shadows. Drinking was not just fun, it was initiation. A man might be forced to drain a tankard of ale until his stomach begged for mercy, cheered on by the circle. Another might have to recite a vulgar verse to prove he was shameless enough to belong. Laughter roared, but beneath it lay a truth. If you could not endure humiliation, you could not endure loyalty. Yet beneath the games, darker bonds formed. Brotherhoods swore to shield each other from law, even church. If a brother committed a crime, the group protected him, hid him, even lied under oath. Loyalty was law, heavier than justice, and breaking that loyalty, a punishment crueler than any gallows. Exile from the group. Imagine it, one night you are laughing, drinking, warm in the circle. The next you are cast out, left in the dark with no one to guard your back. Which fate is worse, execution by law or loneliness in a world where loneliness kills? Science has a word for this: social survival. Humans, especially men in unstable societies, craved groups to reinforce identity. The medieval brotherhood was more than fraternity, it was armor. And under torchlight, that armor gleamed stronger than steel. But there was also comedy, for the brotherhood thrived on humor as much as fear. One man might stumble, trying to kiss a pig as part of initiation, causing roars of laughter. Another might try to balance on a barrel while singing a hymn backward, crashing spectacularly to the ground. These ridiculous trials made pain tolerable, turned fear into fun, and cemented bonds deeper than solemn words ever could. Still, behind the laughter lurked questions. How far would you go for your brotherhood? Would you lie for them, steal for them, kill for them? And if the time came, would you choose your oath to the brotherhood over your oath to God? The Midnight Brotherhood was a paradox, playful yet deadly. Warm yet cold, fragile yet stronger than blood, and as the torches burned low, every man knew, once you entered, you belonged forever, even if forever ended in fire. When the torches dimmed and the streets surrendered to silence, whispers of forbidden desire took flight, not loud, not shouted across taverns, but carried softly like smoke curling through rafters. In daylight, men were bound by rules, labor in the fields, prayers in the church, duties to family and guild. Yet when shadows wrapped the town, something stirred inside, yearning that had no place in sermons or law books. Close your eyes and imagine it. The smell of damp hay in a stable, the soft clink of ale mugs abandoned on a table, the muffled laughter of men who had drunk too much but still wanted more. Not of drink, but of touch, of words, of freedom. A man leans toward another, his voice lowered, not about taxes or trade, but about a woman whose glance lingered too long. Or about the ache of loneliness his marriage never eased. That whisper was dangerous. Daylight made such confessions treason to morality. Night transformed them into fragile truth. Medieval chronicles are full of warnings. Priests thundered from pulpits that lust opened doors for the devil, that secret affairs tore villages apart. Laws punished adultery with public shaming, whipping, even mutilation. Yet records also reveal fines paid by respectable men for nightly wanderings or illicit visits. Where there are laws, there is breaking of laws. Where there is silence, there are whispers. Desire took many shapes. For some, it was a stolen glance at another man's wife, a forbidden kiss in the dark of a churchyard. For others, it was the craving for beauty they dared not name, love that dared not speak its name in daylight, and for many, it was simply hunger for freedom itself. To step outside roles of obedient husband, dutiful son, loyal worker, if only for a night. Imagine you in that world. Would you risk sneaking past curfew, heart-pounding, to meet someone waiting by the riverbank? Would you lie awake, torn between fear of eternal damnation and the warmth of a secret embrace, which would weigh heavier, the priest's warning of fire and brimstone, or the simple human ache to be wanted? Science today gives us terms like the disinhibition effect. Psychologists know that darkness lowers inhibitions, granting courage we lack in daylight. For the medieval man, anonymity was not a username on a screen, but the hood of a cloak, the mask of shadows, the quiet cover of midnight. Under that cover, men acted boldly. They confessed, they touched, they dared. Strange how centuries pass, yet the stage for forbidden desire remains the same. Anonymity. And not all whispers were sinful. Some carried comedy as much as lust. A man drunk on mead might boast that the miller's daughter had eyes like jewels, before falling face first into a pigsty, to the roar of laughter. Another might tease that he preferred chasing chickens to chasing women, clutching a squawking hen as proof, while friends howled with amusement. Even humor was desire in disguise, a way to admit longing without the weight of shame. But make no mistake, forbidden whispers could end in tragedy. Caught lovers were paraded through streets, heads shaved, jeers raining down. A jealous husband might brand his rival with hot iron. Sometimes entire families feuded, villages splitting over whispers that had grown too loud. Desire could bind men in thrilling secrecy, or destroy them in daylight. There were also rituals, secret and strange. Some brotherhoods included confessions of desire as part of initiation. Around a fire, men admitted sins of lust. Not to priests, but to peers. Each laugh, each nod was both mockery and solidarity. You are not alone in your weakness. Others turned desire into song. Ballads hummed in taverns carried coded verses of longing, thinly veiled but understood by those who listened carefully. Music, after all, was another kind of whisper. So here is the question for you. If you lived then, what would you do with your forbidden desire? Hide it until it soured your soul, whisper it into the night, risking punishment but tasting freedom, or transform it into laughter, hoping humor could disguise the fire in your chest. The medieval night was more than shadows and fear. It was also a stage for confessions that daylight silenced, for desires too fragile or too dangerous to survive in the open. And when the whispers rose, carried by torch smoke and moonlight, men became most human, not in prayer, not in war, but in longing. Before the clash of steel at dawn, there was the night before, the warrior's night. For medieval men, that night was as important as the battle itself. Sleep was rare, sometimes impossible. Instead, the hours were filled with rituals that blended fear, laughter, faith, and madness. Picture a field just beyond a looming castle. Fires blaze in crude pits, the smell of roasting meat mingling with sweat and smoke. Armor lies scattered like husks on the ground. Men gather in clusters, some singing with voices too loud, others sharpening blades with steady hands, sparks flying into the dark. If you listen closely, you hear the strange rhythm of anticipation. One moment laughter, the next, silence heavy enough to crush the chest. Drinking was central. Casks of ale and mead were drained, mugs clashing together in reckless celebration. The more they drank, the braver they felt, or pretended to feel. A soldier might jump on a barrel, swaying, boasting of how he would kill 10 enemies with one swing of his sword, only to tumble into the mud. Greeted by roars of laughter, humor disguised fear. To mock death was to weaken its grip. But there were prayers too. Warriors clutched small relics, a fragment of bone, a scrap of cloth blessed by priests, and whispered words they barely understood. Some carved crosses into their shields. Others muttered charms passed down by mothers. Tie this knot and no blade can cut you. Religion and superstition blended into one desperate shield. Science today calls this ritual coping, a way to regulate terror. Back then it was the only armor they trusted more than steel. Tests of courage often filled the hours. In some armies, men pressed hands to burning brands, proving they would not flinch. Others were forced to hold heavy stones until fingers bled. Laughter masked the cruelty, but every man knew if you could not endure pain tonight, you would not endure dawn. Some chroniclers even describe commanders executing soldiers who showed fear. A brutal reminder that courage was not optional. Now imagine yourself among them. The fire glows on your face, sweat dripping beneath your helmet. Your stomach twists, not from hunger, but from the knowledge that tomorrow you may be lying on the ground, cold and broken. Would you drink until your fear dulled? Would you laugh louder than the man beside you, hoping to hide your trembling hands? Or would you fall to your knees, whispering prayers as if words could stop arrows? There was music too. Men beat shields like drums, sang bawdy songs that mocked the enemy. One verse promised that Frenchmen ran faster than frightened hens. Another that English arrows would pierce German armor like butter. Ridiculous, crude, but powerful. Song transformed fear into unity. Rhythm turned trembling men into a single voice. And then there were visions. Some claimed to dream of saints appearing in the night, promising victory. Others swore they saw omens in the fire, the head of a lion, the wing of an angel. Whether real or imagined, these visions spread through the camp like sparks, feeding belief stronger than rations ever could. But the warrior's night was not only solemn. There was mischief. Soldiers dared each other to wrestle naked in the mud, or to balance on spears like circus performers. One man, too drunk, might mistake his helmet for a chamber pot. To the eternal amusement of his comrades, laughter echoed across the camp, almost drowning out the distant hoot of an owl, a reminder that death too was watching. The warrior's night was paradox, sacred and profane, terrifying and hilarious. It was a theater where men pretended to be fearless, even as their hearts hammered like drums. And when dawn crept over the horizon, the rituals ended. The songs fell silent, the laughter died. What remained was steel screams and the bitter truth that not all who had laughed the night before would live to laugh again. The moon rose high, pale and silver, casting its cold light across fields and crooked rooftops. In that glow, men reached for masks, some crudely carved from wood, others stitched from scraps of leather or linen. To put on the mask was not only to hide, it was to transform. For one night the farmer was no longer a farmer, the apprentice no longer a servant, the soldier no longer bound by rank. Under the moon, men could become beasts, demons, saints, or fools. Imagine standing at the edge of a clearing. Torches burn low, smoke drifting upward. A circle of masked figures dances wildly, chanting nonsense syllables, stamping their feet against the earth as if to wake the sleeping soil. The sight is absurd, comic even. One mask painted like a snarling wolf, another like a drooping donkey, yet another with crude horns. But the laughter that escapes is uneasy. These men are not just playing. They are testing the boundary between order and chaos. Medieval moon rituals carried layers of meaning. Some were playful, little more than excuses for mischief. Men raced across fields in masks, chasing each other with sticks, collapsing in mud, roaring with laughter. Others turned darker. Masked groups sometimes punished outsiders, forcing them to crawl on all fours, smearing ash on their faces, or dunking them in cold rivers. Cruel, yes, but it also welded the group together. Shame shared is loyalty proven. Science gives us words like de-individuation, the psychological effect of losing oneself in anonymity. Under a mask, men do things they would never dare barefaced. The medieval mask amplified that effect. It was a license to shed identity, to step beyond guilt. A peasant might spit at a noble's likeness painted on a mask, defiance he would never risk in daylight. A soldier might mimic a priest, reciting prayers backward to jeering laughter. In the mosque's shadow, taboo turned to entertainment. But there were moments of wonder too. Under the moon, some believed masks held magic. A mask of a boar might lend strength, a mask of an owl might grant sight in darkness. Men howled like wolves, hissed like snakes, crowed like roosters, their voices echoing in the night. Did they truly believe the moon listened? Some did, and perhaps as their shadows stretched long across the fields, they felt transformed, not just pretending but becoming. Now imagine yourself with them. Would you wear the mask? Would you run into the night, screaming nonsense into the cold air, surrendering to wildness? Or would you fear that once the mask slipped on, something inside you might not come back off? Historians sometimes dismiss these rituals as drunken antics. But in a world bound by strict hierarchy, the mask was rebellion. It let men play at power, mock authority, flirt with danger. A miller could be king for a night, a shepherd could be a monster, and no priest or lord could stop him, at least until the masks came off. And the comedy was as sharp as the fear. A man might trip on his own mask string and tumble into a pig trough, to the delight of his fellows. Another, too drunk, might forget his role and declare himself Moon Emperor, strutting with a cabbage crown, cheered by the circle. These absurdities stitched humor into terror, making the night both carnival and nightmare. The masks of the moon were more than costumes. They were experiments in freedom, in madness, in the parts of humanity daylight refused. Every laugh, every cruelty, every howl into the night was a declaration. Beneath every face lies another face, waiting for the dark to set it free. Shadows are playful, are not they? They stretch, they twist, they make shapes that can frighten or amuse depending on the mind that sees them. For medieval men, shadows were not just tricks of the moonlight. They were invitations to games, to tests, to rituals that blurred the line between laughter and terror. Imagine a tavern long after midnight. The fire burns low, smoke curling lazily, and the room fills with drunken men who dare each other into madness. One suggests a game. Stand in the corner, hold a torch behind your back, and watch your shadow dance against the wall. If the shadow looks like a demon, you must drink until you collapse. If it looks like an angel, you must confess your darkest sin. Laughter erupts, but beneath it lies unease. Who decides whether a shadow is holy or damned? These shadow games spread across villages, whispered of like ghost stories. Children played innocent versions, making animal shapes with their hands. Men twisted them into something darker. Some used knives, each man would cast his shadow and then slice at it, testing whether cutting the shadow might wound the soul. Others tied wagers to the shapes. If your shadow looked like a beast, you owed the group a night of free ale. If it looked like a corpse, you owed them your courage in a fight. Science today calls this projection, how our minds shape meaning in random forms. Back then, shadows were seen as fragments of the soul, pieces that could be stolen, cursed or blessed. It was said witches could capture a man's shadow and twist it into obedience. Imagine playing a game where your very soul felt at stake. Would you laugh louder to hide your fear, or refuse the game and be mocked as a coward? There are chronicles of darker nights still. In forests, groups of men built circles of fire and stood inside them, their shadows stretching into the trees. One man would step forward, telling a story of the figure he saw in his shadow, perhaps a beast, perhaps a woman, perhaps a death omen. If the group believed him, he was hailed as visionary. If they doubted him, he was punished, sometimes with mockery, sometimes with real blows. Yet comedy clung to the games. A drunken smith might claim his shadow was a giant, flexing absurdly until he fell flat. An apprentice might panic at his own crooked shadow, convinced it was a devil with horns only to realize it was his bent hat. These moments of foolishness were cherished, retold for weeks. Fear and fun lived side by side, inseparable. But shadow games could also be cruel. Outsiders were sometimes forced into the circle, made to face their shadows while the group jeered. "See, the coward has no shadow," they cried, even if the torchlight simply flickered. Shame was entertainment, pain was bonding, and yet, somewhere in the cruelty, men felt unity. They had faced the dark together, even if at another's expense. Now think of yourself there, the torch behind you, the group watching, shadows flickering wildly. What would your shadow reveal? A beast, a fool, a ghost? And what would you dare to confess if your shadow demanded truth? The shadow games remind us of something timeless that men, whether medieval or modern, have always played with fear, bending it into laughter, turning the unknown into ritual. Shadows on the wall are never just shadows. They are mirrors of longing, of terror, of the parts of us we try hardest to hide. The tavern was more than a place to drink. At night it became a stage where men balanced on the knife's edge between ale and blood. Imagine pushing open a creaking wooden door. The smell of smoke, sweat, and spilled beer rushing at you. Inside, torchlight flickers across faces flushed red from drink, wooden mugs slam on tables. Dice rattle, songs tumble out in off-key shouts. At first glance it seems like joy, but beneath the laughter tension coils like a snake, waiting to strike. Ale loosened tongues. Men who spent the day silent behind plows or forges suddenly found their voices. They sang, they bragged, they told stories of hunts and battles, often stretching truth until it snapped. One man might swear he slew a bear with bare hands. Another might boast he drank more than a priest's blessing could forgive. The tavern was full of such claims, half comedy, half competition. The louder you laughed, the more you belonged. But with ale came quarrels. A spilled drink, a crooked dice roll, a joke pushed too far. Suddenly mugs became weapons, fists flew, benches overturned. And blood spilled onto straw floors. Sometimes it ended quickly, men shaking hands, slapping backs, returning to drink. Other times the fight grew darker. Daggers flashed. A man might not walk out again. Science calls this disinhibition, the way alcohol weakens restraint. For the medieval tavern it was both danger and glue. To fight was to test courage. To bleed was to prove loyalty. Men who brawled together often laughed louder afterward, scars turning into badges of belonging. Blood mixed with ale. Violence tangled with friendship. Picture yourself in that smoky room. Dice clatter, someone shouts at you to join. Would you wager your coin knowing you might win ale or earn bruises? Would you laugh off an insult or let rage guide your hand? In the medieval tavern, hesitation was weakness. The group valued boldness, even recklessness. Not all was brutality. There was humor sharp enough to pierce tension. A man too drunk might try to woo a barmaid by singing off-key ballads, only to trip into a barrel of fish, splashing scales across the floor. Another might attempt to juggle knives, failing spectacularly, earning both applause and ridicule. Laughter and risk mingled, until you could not tell where one ended and the other began. Yet darker rituals lurked behind tavern doors. Some brotherhoods used taverns for initiation. A newcomer might be forced to drain an entire cask, to duel with fists until teeth cracked, or to confess sins in front of jeering men. Failure brought humiliation, success brought acceptance. And in some places acceptance demanded blood, cut palms pressed together, or a sacrifice of an animal, its blood mixing with spilled ale on the floor. The tavern was church and battlefield combined. Men sought communion not through bread and wine but through beer and bruises. Every cheer was prayer. Every brawl confession, every scar a relic. And when the night ended, when men staggered into the cold, the bonds forged inside lingered. Some carried hangovers, others carried wounds. All carried the memory of belonging, sealed between ale and blood. Church bells ruled the rhythm of medieval life. They rang for prayer, for work, for weddings, for death. But there were nights when the bells remained silent, deliberately silent, and in that silence strange gatherings stirred. Picture a village church under moonlight. Its stone walls loom pale, the cross casting a long shadow across the graveyard. Normally bells would toll at dusk, reminding men to pray and go home. But tonight they do not. Instead, men slip through side doors, hoods low, carrying no candles. They do not come to worship. They come for something the church itself forbids. Whispers of midnight meetings appear in chronicles. Groups of men used churches after dark, not for mass, but for oaths, feasts, even trials. Some claimed the silence of the bells meant permission. If God did not call them, then God did not see. Others believed the quiet bells masked them from angels, leaving the night open for mortal secrets. Inside, the air was heavy with incense residue, the faint smell of wax and the cold bite of stone. Men circled altars, not kneeling but standing. Voices low. A cup of ale passed hands. A loaf of bread was torn and shared, not sacrament but pact. They mocked the rituals of priests, twisting them into something profane. Imagine watching men drink from a chalice not in reverence but in laughter, swearing loyalty with crumbs in their beards. Science speaks of inversion rituals, acts that flip sacred symbols to bond participants through shared defiance. For the medieval man, turning holy ceremony upside down was both thrilling and terrifying. To mock the church in daylight was death. To do it under silent bells was freedom, at least for a night. But the silence was not always rebellion. Sometimes it was grief. After plague swept through a village, bells that normally tolled for the dead remained still. Men gathered in churches without priests, whispering prayers for lost brothers, fearing more deaths would come if the bells rang. Silence itself became a ritual, an offering of quiet to the divine. And there were darker tales. Some whispered of men using churches at night for judgments. A thief dragged before the altar, torches casting jagged shadows. while masked villagers decided his fate. No priest, no written law, only voices and firelight. Punishments varied: a fine, a beating, exile. Sometimes worse. The bell stayed silent because no one was meant to know. Now imagine yourself there, standing in the cold nave. The silence presses on your chest. Do you join the circle, sharing bread and drink in mocking communion? Do you whisper prayers for the dead, hoping the silence keeps the plague at bay? Or do you shiver at the torchlight trial, knowing the bell will never toll for the man condemned tonight? Humor clung even to these moments. A drunk farmer might stumble into the altar, muttering that the bread was too stale for miracles, sending ripples of laughter through the tense crowd. Another might snore loudly in a pew, mistaken for a spirit until his neighbors kicked him awake. Even in forbidden nights, men found ways to laugh, because laughter made the silence less heavy. The church bells that never rang remind us absence can be as powerful as presence. Where bells should have thundered, silence became its own voice, carrying rebellion, grief, secrecy, or fear. And for the men who gathered in that hush, the night was louder than any tolling bell. The town sleeps, but in a shuttered chamber at the edge of the market, a faint glow flickers. It is not candlelight, nor the steady flame of a hearth. It is something wilder, a fire fed with strange powders, its smoke tinted green and blue. Around it gather men with eager eyes, whispering in the hour most feared and most desired. The alchemist's hour. Alchemy was a word of power in the Middle Ages. To some, it meant forbidden science, a dangerous blending of knowledge and heresy. To others, it was a chance at transformation, turning lead to gold, sickness to health, ignorance to wisdom. But for the men who gathered at night, alchemy was more than philosophy. It was adventure. Picture the scene: jars of powder lined against the wall, herbs hanging from beams, a copper alembic dripping into a bowl. The air smells sharp, metallic, with a sweetness that burns the throat. An alchemist stands hunched over, muttering words in Latin, while his companions, merchants, apprentices, even soldiers, lean close, waiting for the moment when smoke might reveal fortune or fire might explode disaster. Science today recognizes some truths in their work. Alchemists experimented with acids, minerals, and plants, sometimes stumbling on discoveries we still use. Distillation, tinctures, alloys. But at night, under flickering torchlight, it all seemed like magic. To medieval men, this was not chemistry. This was bargaining with the universe. Imagine being there. The alchemist drops a pinch of powder, and suddenly the flame leaps high, painting shadows on the wall. The men gasp. Some laugh nervously, others cross themselves in fear. You feel your own heart race. Is it miracle? Is it trick? If the alchemist offered you a sip of his concoction, promising courage, love, or protection, would you drink, or would you fear you were swallowing poison? There were whispers of darker experiments too, tales of alchemists mixing blood with herbs, of men drinking potions to gain visions. Some swore the drinks made them dream of angels. Others claimed they saw demons grinning in the fire. In those hours, faith and fear mingled. A potion was never just liquid. It was a dare, a gamble with fate. But comedy found its place even here. Imagine an apprentice spilling sulfur on his boots, smoke rising as he hopped in panic, while the circle howled with laughter. Or a soldier sneaking a sip of a bitter brew, spitting it across the floor, shouting it tasted worse than his mother-in-law's soup. These moments eased the tension, reminding everyone that even in pursuit of secrets, men remained human, foolish and fragile. And yet, beneath the laughter, the promise was serious. What if the alchemist truly held the secret? What if this night's experiment succeeded? Gold, eternal youth, invulnerability, dreams that turned sober men into believers. Each crack of glass, each hiss of steam was a heartbeat of hope. The alchemist's hour was not merely about transformation of metals. It was about transformation of men, their fears into courage, their doubt into unity, their longing into ritual. And when the hour passed, when the last jar was sealed and the fire dimmed, the men carried home more than smoke in their clothes. They carried the sense that, for one night, they had touched the edge of mystery. Not every medieval night was hushed whispers in darkened chambers. Some nights exploded with chaos, wild, unholy carnivals where men cast aside restraint and reveled in sin as though tomorrow would never come. They called them feasts, festivals, misrule, but beneath the laughter and color was danger, a carnival of sin. Picture a village square transformed. By day it was muddy ground, goats tied to posts, children running barefoot, but tonight torches blaze. Ale flows in buckets, masks grin from every face. Men stagger arm in arm, chanting songs too obscene to ever be sung in daylight. A blacksmith howls like a wolf. A shepherd spins wildly, knocking over barrels. The air reeks of smoke, sweat, meat roasting, and spilled beer. At these carnivals, rules inverted, priests mocked with costumes, lords imitated and ridiculed. A man might crown himself king of fools, sitting high on a stolen chair while others bowed in drunken parody. Bread was thrown like weapons, sausages dangled like banners, wine poured over heads instead of into mouths. To an outsider, it was madness. To the men inside, it was freedom. Science today recognizes the power of ritual inversion. Anthropologists say breaking rules in controlled chaos strengthens bonds. The medieval carnival worked the same. By mocking authority, men bound themselves to each other. Shared rebellion became shared identity. But sin clung to every torch. Gambling spread through corners, dice rolling on makeshift tables. Fights broke out, sometimes staged, sometimes not. Prostitutes walked boldly among the men, laughing, bargaining, vanishing into alleys. Thieves plied their trade, knives slipping into purses while the crowd roared too loud to notice. Carnival was license, and license came with risk. Imagine yourself there. The music is deafening, drums beaten with bones, pipes shrieking like birds. A masked man offers you a cup brimming with ale, daring you to drink. Do you join the chaos, laughing until your stomach aches, or do you cling to caution, fearing that sin, once tasted, cannot be untasted? Yet comedy ruled as much as fear. Men dressed in absurd costumes, a baker wrapped in flour sacks declaring himself ghost of bread, a farmer wearing a pumpkin as a helmet. One man, too drunk, attempted to dance on a cartwheel, spinning until he collapsed, cheered like a hero. These ridiculous acts gave the carnival its heart. Laughter sharper than sermons, wilder than war cries. But the carnival of sin had shadows, chronicles whisper of deaths, men trampled in crowds, stabbed in drunken quarrels, or vanishing into the night never to return. Some said demons walked freely in such chaos, hiding among masks, lured by the abundance of sin. When the torches finally burned out, silence returned heavy, as though the village itself recoiled from what had passed. Still, the carnival returned, year after year, because men needed it. In a world of endless labor, rigid hierarchy, and constant fear, one night of wildness was salvation. Sin was not just indulgence, it was survival. The carnival of sin reminds us men are not only creatures of order, they crave the release of chaos, the sweet burn of rebellion, the laughter that mocks death itself. And when medieval men surrendered to the carnival, they found not just sin, but a strange, dangerous kind of freedom. Feasts were common in the Middle Ages, weddings, harvests, saints' days, but there were nights when celebration twisted into something darker. The Feast of Bones. Imagine long wooden tables creaking under roasted meat, barrels of ale flowing endlessly, and laughter echoing through the night. At first glance, it looks like joy, but beneath it lies ritual, superstition, and a hunger that went far beyond food. Picture the hall. Torches spit smoke into rafters blackened by years of fire. Bones litter the floor, chicken, lamb, pig cracked open to suck out marrow. Men gnaw loudly, tossing scraps to dogs snarling at their feet. The air reeks of fat and sweat thick enough to choke. Songs ring out, some joyous, some grim ballads about death and victory. Every bite is more than nourishment. It is a reminder. To eat is to survive, to outlast famine, to mock death. In Chronicles, the Feast of Bones often followed battles. Victors gathered, roasting animals as symbols of conquered foes. Skulls of livestock decorated tables, sometimes painted with crude faces. Some accounts even whisper that human bones were displayed, trophies from the field, whether true or exaggerated. The symbolism was clear. The living fed, the dead remembered, and fear conquered through consumption. Science calls this catharsis, the release of fear through ritual. For medieval men, devouring meat, cracking bones, and singing about mortality turned terror into triumph. Imagine you there, chewing marrow while a companion bangs a skull like a drum. Would you laugh at the absurdity or shiver at the closeness of death? But the feast was not all grim. Comedy thrived in its excess. Men wore bones as necklaces, antlers as crowns. One drunken butcher strapped ribs to his chest, declaring himself Lord of Bones, strutting until he collapsed in laughter. Another man tossed bones into mugs of ale, challenging friends to drink them down. These antics were grotesque, yes, but also hilarious, reminders that even death could be mocked. And yet, darker rituals hid in the revelry. Some groups believed boiling bones in broth could summon visions. Men gathered around steaming cauldrons, inhaling vapors, swearing they saw faces of the dead rise in the mist. Others whispered that cracking a bone at midnight released spirits who guarded the group. Such beliefs blurred hunger and haunting, turning a meal into a spell. Imagine the scene near midnight. The hall stinks of smoke and grease, bones piled like small mountains. A man raises a femur, tapping it against his cup. Calling for silence, he speaks of fallen brothers, of enemies slain, of the fleeting nature of life. For a moment laughter fades, men bow their heads, chewing slower as though honoring the dead with every bite. Then the silence shatters into song again, louder, wilder, as if to chase ghosts away. The Feast of Bones was paradox, grotesque yet sacred, comic yet terrifying. It bound men together in hunger, in triumph, in fear of the grave. And when dawn came, the bones were not cleaned away. They stayed scattered, grim reminders of a night when men feasted not only on flesh, but on the thin line between life and death. The night was never truly empty in the medieval world. Even when torches guttered out and taverns went silent, eyes remained, watchers in the dark. Some human, some imagined, some perhaps not of this world, kept vigil over the sleeping town. And for the men who lived under those gazes, every step after sunset carried both fear and fascination. Picture the village lane at midnight. The moon hides behind clouds, leaving the path in shadow. You hear a cough, a shuffle of boots, the soft clink of chainmail. It is the night watch, men sworn to guard streets from thieves, fires, or worse. Their lanterns swing, throwing brief circles of light that vanish as quickly as they appear. To a passerby, these watchers are safety. To a drunk sneaking home late, they are suspicion and judgment. The night watch had its rituals. Men swore oaths before lords or councils, promising to stay awake through freezing winds and pouring rain. They carried horns to sound alarms, cudgels to strike troublemakers, and sometimes ropes to drag offenders to jail. Chroniclers note punishments for guards who slept on duty. Fines, floggings, even branding. For in the medieval night, one man's nap could mean an entire town burned to the ground. But not all watchers were official. There were whispers of silent watchers, neighbors who spied through shutters, reporting gossip by day after observing by night. Imagine sneaking to meet a lover, only to find your secret retold in the market by morning. In villages where reputation was survival, unseen eyes were as feared as swords. And then there were watchers less human. Men swore they felt eyes in the forest, glowing pairs that vanished when torches drew near, wolves. Perhaps, spirits, perhaps more. Stories told of shadowy figures standing at crossroads, cloaked in black, unmoving, watching until dawn. No one knew if they were travelers, monks or specters. Few dared approach. Science today might call this hypervigilance, the mind sharpening senses in darkness, inventing threats where little exists. But to medieval men, every flicker in the dark carried weight. Better to imagine a ghost than to miss the thief who slit purses or the wolf that snatched a child. Imagine yourself in that silence. The street empty, yet your skin prickles. Someone is watching, you know it, though you cannot see. Do you walk faster, muttering a prayer? Do you stop, demanding the darkness reveal itself? Or do you laugh nervously, convincing yourself it is only the ale speaking? Comedy softened even this fear. A farmer might prank neighbors by crouching with glowing coals for eyes, leaping out at drunks and sending them running. Another might mimic the watchman's stiff march, mocking their seriousness. Laughter gave men power over the fear of unseen watchers, yet when the laughter faded, the unease returned. Because whether human, beast, or spirit, the night always watched back. The watchers in the dark were reminders that no secret was safe, no step unseen. And for medieval men, every journey under the stars was also a performance. An audience, visible or not, was always there. By day, medieval men were divided. Lords and peasants, masters and apprentices, priests and sinners. But at night, under the cover of shadow, they found ways to gather as equals in hidden circles. These were not taverns or festivals. These were secret brotherhoods, bound not by blood but by oath. Imagine a barn far from the village, its doors barred, hay piled high to muffle sound. Inside, a circle of men kneel around a single candle. Faces flicker with shifting light. One man recites words half prayer, half curse. Another pricks his finger, letting blood drip into a shared cup. When each man drinks, he joins not just a group, but a secret that cannot be spoken in daylight. The brotherhoods varied. Some were simple bands of protection, men vowing to defend each other from landlords or soldiers. Others were more dangerous. Plots against rulers, conspiracies whispered with clenched fists. Some were stranger still, blending superstition and play, men howling like wolves, calling themselves packs, swearing never to betray the circle. Science today calls this ritual bonding. Shared danger, shared secrecy, it forges ties stronger than contracts. For medieval men, these oaths were survival. In a world where justice favored the powerful, brotherhood meant someone would stand with you when no one else dared. But secrecy carried risk. Chronicles tell of men executed for conspiracy, their brotherhoods betrayed by a single loose tongue. Inquisitors wrote of groups practicing forbidden rites, accusing them of devil worship, though often they were little more than frightened men seeking protection. Yet the fear was real, once sworn. You belong to the brotherhood until death, or until betrayal. Imagine yourself there. The candlelight warms your face, the smell of hay thick around you. A man holds out the cup, dark liquid glinting. Do you drink, binding yourself forever to the men beside you, or do you refuse, knowing refusal marks you as an outsider, perhaps even a threat? What price would you pay for belonging? Brotherhoods were not without humor. After solemn vows, men sometimes staged absurd trials for new members, forcing them to crow like roosters, or carry buckets of ale without spilling a drop. One unlucky man might be made to wear a sheep's skull, stumbling while his companions roared with laughter. Such ridiculousness softened the edge of secrecy, reminding the men that fear and joy could coexist. And yet there were darker sides. Some brotherhoods demanded cruel tests, a fistfight to prove strength, a branding to prove loyalty, or even a mock execution to test courage. Survive, and you were trusted. Fail, and you were never spoken of again. The secret brotherhoods reveal something eternal, the human need for belonging, for loyalty stronger than law, for identity beyond the roles of day. When medieval men gathered in the dark, they were not peasants or lords, they were brothers, and the oaths they whispered still echo in the silence of forgotten barns and ruined halls. The medieval day belonged to the plow, the forge, and the market, but the night, the night, sometimes belonged to the hunt. Midnight hunts were not just for wolves or deer. They were rituals of courage, bonding, and sometimes sheer madness, when men left their beds to chase shadows across the fields. Picture the forest under a full moon. Branches creak in the wind, owls call from the treetops, and the earth smells of damp moss and rotting leaves. A group of men, cloaks pulled tight, clutch spears and torches. Their dogs bark, straining against leashes. One man whispers of a wolf that took a sheep. Another claims he saw a spirit in the trees. Fear and excitement blur until the line between prey and legend disappears. The midnight hunt served many purposes. Practically, it protected villages from predators. But it was also a test. To walk into the forest at night meant proving yourself against both beasts and fears. Some chronicles describe hunts where men swore oaths before setting out, not to run, not to falter, no matter what they saw. If one man broke, the shame lingered for years. Science today would call this exposure, facing fear to reduce its power. But for medieval men, it was myth. The forest was a place of spirits, fairies, and demons. To hunt in its shadows was to prove dominion not only over animals, but over the unknown. Now imagine yourself there. The torch sputters, your spear feels heavy, your breath clouds in the cold. Something moves ahead, branches snap, eyes gleam. Do you charge, heart racing, or do you freeze, praying it is no more than a fox? Every step is gamble, every sound a threat. The hunts were not always solemn. Comedy burst through fear. A drunken farmer might mistake a goat for a demon, shrieking until the group collapsed in laughter. Another might chase shadows for hours, only to discover he had been pursuing his own dog. These stories became legends in themselves, told in taverns for years. But there were darker versions. The wild hunts whispered in Europe. Tales spoke of ghostly riders sweeping through the skies at midnight. Horns blaring, hounds howling. Men claimed to see them, and some joined earthly hunts in imitation. To ride at night, torches blazing, was to flirt with the supernatural, to mimic the dead who never rested. Sometimes the hunt turned cruel. Outsiders or accused thieves were forced to run through forests while villagers chased them like prey. It was punishment and sport combined, laughter mixing with terror. To be caught meant beating, humiliation, sometimes worse. To watch was to understand how thin the line between justice and entertainment could be. Yet the midnight hunt bound men together. When they returned at dawn, tired and filthy, they carried stories that sealed friendships. A wolf slain, a spirit glimpsed, a prank gone wrong, all became part of the lore of the brotherhood. And in a world where the night was feared, claiming it through the hunt was a kind of victory. The hunts of midnight remind us, fear is not only endured but pursued, chased into the shadows until it becomes laughter, legend, or triumph. For medieval men, the night was not just a danger, it was prey. Coins clink, dice roll, cards shuffle. These sounds might feel modern, but they echoed in medieval nights just as sharply. Gambling was forbidden in many towns. Denounced by priests, punished by law. Yet when torches dimmed and doors shut, men formed circles of chance, where fortunes rose and fell in the time it takes for dice to tumble. Picture a stable loft thick with hay dust. A group of men sit cross-legged on the floor, a lantern smoking in the corner. A cloak serves as the table. Dice carved from bone clatter across its folds, rolling into fate. Each face gleams in the light, each throw followed by cheers or curses. The air hums with tension, ale, and the smell of sweat-soaked wool. The gambler's circle was more than play. It was rebellion. The church declared dice games sinful, tools of the devil. Town charters forbade them, fearing riots and debt. Yet men gathered anyway, because gambling promised what daily toil could not: sudden change. A poor apprentice might dream of doubling his week's wage. A farmer might risk everything for a chance at relief from crushing taxes. The dice became hope, cruel and intoxicating. Science today would call this risk-reward response, the thrill of uncertainty activating the brain's reward circuits. But for medieval men, it was magic. Dice were carved from bones of animals, sometimes even human remains, believed to carry power. To roll was not just chance, but an act of fate, as though spirits guided the fall. Now imagine yourself in that circle. The dice rest in your palm, warm from another man's hand. Voices crowd around, roll, roll, if you win. Ale pours into your mug, laughter rings, your name celebrated. If you lose, the circle jeers, and perhaps your last coin vanishes. Do you throw anyway? Or clutch the dice, fearing luck has deserted you? Not all games were solemn. Comedy burst between wagers. A drunken tanner might bet his boots, then hobble home barefoot. Another might claim his chicken could predict dice, holding the poor bird over the cloak while the circle howled with laughter. Such absurdity gave the gambler's circle its charm, a blend of greed and jest, of danger and delight. But darker edges cut through. Men ruined by losses sometimes turned violent. Knives flashed, debts ended in blood. Chronicles speak of gamblers exiled, flogged, even executed for fights born in midnight circles. And yet the games continued, because risk itself was addictive. The fear of loss sharpened the joy of winning. In some brotherhoods, gambling became initiation. A new member might be forced to stake everything, coins, boots, dignity, on a single roll. Win, and he earned respect. Lose, and he faced ridicule, or worse. Luck was treated like judgment, deciding who was worthy. The gambler's circle reminds us. Men crave more than survival. They crave chance, the dizzying hope that fortune might smile just once. In the medieval night, dice and coins were more than games. They were prayers in another form, whispered not to God but to fate itself. Not all medieval nights were filled with drink, dice, or blood. Some belonged to the pilgrim, the wanderer who walked in darkness seeking light. The pilgrim's midnight walks were journeys both physical and spiritual, carried out on lonely roads when the world was silent, save for wind and distant bells. Picture a narrow path winding between fields, the earth damp with dew. A lone figure trudges forward, cloak heavy, staff tapping against stones. His satchel holds only bread, water, and perhaps a relic tied in cloth. Above him, stars blaze, constellations guiding his steps. To walk by night was to escape prying eyes, to travel without the burden of crowds, but it was also to face dangers unseen. Wolves prowled, thieves lurked, and always the pilgrim's own doubts walked beside him. Pilgrimage was sacred duty. Men set out to holy shrines, Santiago, Canterbury, Rome, hoping for blessings, healing, or forgiveness. But the road itself became ritual. Each step was prayer, each mile a penance. By day, pilgrims banded together. By night, many walked alone, seeking silence that sharpened their devotion. Science today might call this meditative walking, repetitive steps calming the mind, creating rhythm between body and spirit. For medieval men, it was pilgrimage in motion. The dark road stripped away distraction. Alone with the stars and the crunch of gravel, a pilgrim confronted not only God but himself. Imagine you on that road. The moon casts your shadow long. Ahead lies nothing but dark horizon. Do you press on, whispering prayers for forgiveness? Do you fear each rustle in the hedge, wondering if it is thief or demon? Or do you feel a strange peace, knowing the path itself is holy? The midnight walk was not without comedy. Chronicles tell of pilgrims who snored so loudly they were mistaken for bandits hiding in the brush. Others tripped into ditches, crawling out covered in mud, their solemnity broken by laughter from companions. Even devotion found room for clumsiness. But there was danger too. Robbers targeted pilgrims, knowing they carried coins for offerings. Some never reached their shrines, others returned scarred, yet spoke of visions in the night, lights that guided them, voices that comforted them. Whether divine or imagined, such moments gave meaning to risk. And there were stranger tales. Some believed midnight pilgrims walked alongside spirits, the souls of the unburied condemned to wander until dawn. To walk then was to share company with the dead, to pray not only for oneself but for those forgotten. Imagine feeling unseen footsteps beside yours, the hairs on your neck rising, yet pressing forward because faith demanded it. When dawn finally broke, the pilgrim reached a new village, a chapel, or merely another mile of road, yet every midnight walk left its mark. Feet blistered, heart weary, but spirit sharpened. The pilgrim's journey was not just toward a shrine, it was toward transformation, step by step, through the silence of the medieval night. Not every secret ritual of medieval men was about danger or sin. Some nights were devoted to healing, though healing in the Middle Ages was far from what we know today. Under the pale glow of the moon, men sought cures in herbs, charms, and whispered prayers. These were the healers of the moonlight, working in shadows where church medicine feared to tread. Picture a clearing in the woods, a small fire smoldering. Around it, men sit cross-legged while one stirs a pot of bitter-smelling broth. Leaves of sage, roots of mandrake, crushed garlic, and perhaps stranger things float in the liquid. The healer dips a wooden spoon, offering sips to those who cough or limp. The men believe the moonlight itself blesses the potion, pulling sickness from the body. Medieval medicine was a mixture of faith, superstition, and experiment. The church taught that illness was punishment for sin, cured by confession and prayer. But men knew herbs worked too, willow bark easing fevers, garlic fighting infection, honey sealing wounds, and so healers blended both worlds. Prayer with poultices, charms with roots. By night, away from priests' eyes, men trusted the healer more than the sermon. Science today confirms some of their wisdom. Willow bark contains salicin, like modern aspirin. Garlic does fight bacteria, honey prevents rot. Yet much was dangerous guesswork. Mandrake could numb pain but also kill. Nightshade might dull fever or stop the heart. Every sip under the moonlight was both remedy and risk. Imagine yourself there. The healer presses a cup into your hands. The broth steams, bitter on your tongue, your stomach twisting. Around you, men hum low prayers, some clutching amulets, others touching scars. Do you drink, trusting in roots and ritual, or do you refuse, fearing poison more than pain? Healing circles also carried humor. Men joked about the taste of potions, swearing the cure was worse than the disease. A blacksmith might cough dramatically, pretending death only to wink as companions laughed. Another might slip extra garlic into a friend's cup, sending him home reeking so badly his wife made him sleep in the barn. Laughter, too, was medicine. But there was a darker edge. Some healers were accused of witchcraft, dragged before courts for practicing cures outside the church. Men who sought them risked punishment. And yet they came anyway, because pain, wounds, and sickness did not wait for permission. In the quiet hours, when fevers burned or bones ached, the healer of the moonlight was hope itself. And then there were the mysteries. Tales speak of men who claimed visions during healing rituals, seeing saints or ancestors in the firelight, hearing voices in the wind. Whether real or imagined, these visions gave meaning to suffering. Illness became not just punishment but passage, a trial that could reveal hidden truths. The healers of the moonlight remind us medicine is not only science, it is faith, courage, and the willingness to risk trust. In medieval nights, where doctors were scarce and pain constant, men turned to the shadows for help. And sometimes, under the pale gaze of the moon, they found it. Fire was life in the Middle Ages, warmth in the cold, light in the dark, a defense against beasts. But for some men, fire was more than tool. It was spectacle, ritual, and dare. In secret gatherings, they became fire dancers of the night, taming flames to impress, to frighten, or to commune with something beyond themselves. Picture a field outside the village, the grass trampled by boots. A ring of men stands around a bonfire, sparks spiraling into the sky. The flames roar, painting faces red and gold. One man steps forward, bare-chested, gripping a torch. He swings it in wide arcs, trails of fire cutting the darkness. Another leaps through the blaze, hair singed, laughter wild, the crowd howls approval. Fire dancing was not recorded in every chronicle, but stories survive. Men juggling brands at feasts, soldiers daring each other to run barefoot across coals. Even peasants shaping flames into mock dragons by tossing herbs and resin into the blaze. The spectacle blurred the line between play and ritual. Fire was dangerous. To control it was to claim power over nature itself. Science today explains some of it. Resin makes fire flare green or blue. Alcohol burns bright but fast. Coal walking, when done quickly, often spares the skin. Because ash insulates. But to medieval men, these feats were miraculous. Flames did not simply burn, they obeyed those bold enough to command them. Imagine yourself there. The heat blasts your face, your eyes water. A torch is thrust into your hands. The crowd chanting for you to join. Do you swing it, risking the flame's kiss on your skin? Do you leap the bonfire, praying your clothes do not catch? Or do you step back, mocked for fear? The choice is as much about courage as about fire. Comedy, as always, flared alongside danger. A drunk might trip mid-leap, landing in ash, rising with scorched eyebrows to the roar of laughter. Another might boast he could swallow flame, only to cough, sputter, and roll in the dirt while friends jeered. These blunders were part of the ritual, reminding men that fire mocked arrogance as easily as it rewarded daring. Yet darker undertones lingered. Some believed fire dancing called spirits. Flames, they said, revealed what hid in shadows. Men swore they saw shapes flicker. Faces, beasts, even devils between the sparks. Others claimed leaping through fire cleansed sin, burning away guilt for a night. Such beliefs gave the dance a holy edge, mixing thrill with dread. The bonfire always ended the same way. As embers glowed, men circled close, telling stories, boasting of scars, swearing oaths. The fire shrank, but its memory stayed, a mark of daring shared by all present. The fire dancers of the night remind us men are drawn to danger, to spectacle, to the edge where fear and awe blur. In the medieval dark, fire was not just light, it was challenge, stage, and companion. And for those who danced with it, the night itself became brighter, stranger, unforgettable. In a world of arranged marriages, rigid class divisions, and ever-watchful eyes, love in the Middle Ages often had to bloom in shadows. The night became the stage for secret meetings. Stolen whispers, trembling hands, and promises too dangerous to speak by day. For medieval men, these moments of forbidden intimacy were both ecstasy and peril. Picture a narrow alley behind timbered houses. The moon slips between clouds, casting silver over cobblestones. A man waits, heart pounding, cloak pulled tight. He hears soft footsteps, then sees her, a figure in a hood, face half hidden. Their eyes meet, and suddenly the silence of the village is filled with something louder than bells, the rush of their secret. Love was not a private matter then. Marriages were contracts between families, alliances of land and power. To love outside these bonds was rebellion, punishable by shame, exile, even death. And yet men risked it because the hunger for affection, for warmth, was stronger than fear. The secret meeting was not only desire, it was defiance. Science today calls this the allure of the forbidden. How danger sharpens passion, how secrecy fuels desire. For medieval men, slipping into the night to meet a lover was proof of courage as much as longing. Each step across the dark carried risk, discovery by neighbors, betrayal by rivals, the wrath of family or church. And still they went. Imagine yourself there. Her hand brushes yours, fingers trembling. Do you dare kiss her beneath the eaves, knowing a window might open above? Do you whisper vows, swearing eternity, though eternity might last only until dawn? Or do you stand silent, letting the closeness speak what words cannot? Comedy found its place even in these dangerous moments. Lovers sometimes chose barns or haystacks for privacy, only to be discovered by a snorting cow or a rooster crowing indignantly. One story tells of a man who, climbing into his lover's window, tumbled into a barrel of pickles, stinking so strongly he could not sneak home unnoticed. Such mishaps became whispered jokes, reminding everyone that even forbidden love had a foolish side. But danger was never far. Chronicles speak of duels fought when affairs were revealed, of men exiled or imprisoned for love deemed dishonorable. Priests thundered from pulpits, calling secret meetings sins against God, yet for every warning new footsteps echoed in the night, because the need to love was stronger than any decree. Some meetings carried tenderness beyond desire. Men and women prayed together in silence, shared songs, or exchanged tokens, rings, ribbons, pressed flowers. These small gestures became anchors of hope carried into battles, fields, and long winters. A ribbon tied on a wrist could feel like armor against despair. The lovers' secret meetings remind us that the medieval night was not only filled with fear, ritual, or laughter. It was also filled with longing. The timeless need to be seen, to be touched, to belong to someone, if only for a fleeting hour. In those stolen moments men discovered not just passion, but the fragile, rebellious heart of humanity. If the medieval day was for toil, then the night often belonged to drink. Taverns, cellars, and barns echoed with drunken revelries, where men forgot hunger, debt, and sorrow in the froth of ale. These gatherings were more than escape. They were rituals of laughter, chaos, and the fragile joy of being alive in a world that so often promised death. Picture a smoky tavern lit by greasy lamps. The benches are crowded with men shoulder to shoulder, mugs slamming against wood, foam spills. Songs rise, and the smell of hops and sweat blends into a heady haze. A farmer stands on a table shouting verses that rhyme poorly but earn thunderous applause. A blacksmith bangs his mug like a drum. The air is alive with noise, heat, and reckless abandon. Drunken revelry was condemned by priests who saw it as a gateway to sin, yet it was unstoppable. Men labored from dawn to dusk, their backs bent, their stomachs thin. Ale gave them not only warmth but freedom, a brief rebellion against order. In the haze of intoxication, peasants mocked lords, apprentices mocked masters, and men who owned nothing felt for a few hours rich. Science today might call this communal intoxication, the way alcohol lowers barriers, releasing laughter, confession, even tears. For medieval men, it was more mystical. Ale was liquid courage, wine a holy symbol turned profane, mead a golden elixir that seemed to bless even the poorest lips. To drink was to join a chorus where sorrow drowned. Imagine yourself there. The mug in your hand sloshes your head light. A man slaps your back, daring you to sing. Do you belt out a tune, voice cracking but cheered by all? Do you challenge another to a drinking contest, knowing the night will punish you at dawn? Or do you sit quiet, letting the roar wash over you, savoring the rare feeling of belonging? Comedy ruled these nights. Men passed out in corners, snoring like pigs. One fellow, too drunk, tried to kiss a goat tethered outside, swearing it was his long-lost sweetheart. Another mistook the fireplace for a bed, waking with eyebrows singed. These tales spread faster than gossip, retold with glee whenever mugs were raised again. But revelries could turn dark. Fights erupted over spilled ale, insults or debts unpaid. Knives flashed and laughter soured into screams. Chronicles record tavern brawls that ended in death, proving how thin the line was between joy and tragedy. Even so, men returned, because the risk itself was part of the thrill. And sometimes in the drunken haze, truths emerged, confessions poured out of love, of regret, of secret dreams. A soldier admitted his fear of war. A farmer wept for children lost to famine. In that chaos, honesty found space, carried on the breath of ale. The drunken revelries remind us. Medieval men were not only workers, fighters, or sinners. They were dreamers, fools, brothers, and clowns. The tavern night was their stage, where grief and laughter danced together, and where for a few precious hours, life tasted sweeter than death. Not every sound of the medieval night was growls of beasts or shouts of drunks. Sometimes it was music, soft, haunting, and alive beneath the stars. The midnight musicians wandered villages, castles, and fields, turning the dark into their stage. For men, these nights of song were escape, communion, and sometimes defiance. Picture a crooked street after curfew, windows shuttered, guards drowsy. Then a lute strums, its notes trembling into the air. A flute joins, clear as running water. Slowly, men step from shadows, gathering in a circle, swaying with mugs in hand. Their voices rise, not polished choirs, but rough, deep, and honest. The night becomes symphony. Music was both sacred and profane in the Middle Ages. Churches filled with chants that echoed heaven, yet taverns pulsed with ballads of war, lust, and mischief. The midnight musicians straddled both worlds. They played hymns twisted into parody, soldier songs turned into jokes, and sometimes melodies so tender they silenced even the drunkest crowd. Science today tells us music triggers the brain's dopamine, binding listeners in shared emotion. But to medieval men, it was enchantment. A lute could heal heartbreak, a drum could summon courage, a song could make hunger fade. To sit in the dark hearing notes drift like smoke was to feel alive in ways daylight seldom allowed. Imagine yourself there. The fiddle scrapes, the drum thumps, voices surround you. Do you sing along, your voice lost in the crowd? Do you clap, stomp, laugh, letting rhythm carry you? Or do you stand quiet, letting the music seep into your bones, washing away fear? Comedy often colored the tunes. Men wrote verses mocking neighbors, lords, or even themselves. A cobbler might sing about shoes so bad they made pigs limp. A farmer might strum about his goat outsmarting him at market. Laughter and melody mixed, turning mockery into bonding. But music carried danger, too. Authorities feared songs that mocked rulers or priests. Some musicians were whipped, jailed, or driven out for lyrics too bold. And yet the songs survived, carried from village to village, growing stronger in whispers and choruses. The midnight musician was rebel as much as entertainer. At times music became ritual. Men sang before hunts, battles, or secret meetings. They believed songs summoned luck, driving away spirits. Binding courage to the group, even when voices cracked, the act itself mattered, proof that men could defy silence together. When dawn crept, the music faded, leaving echoes in alleys and fields, but the memory endured. The midnight musicians remind us medieval nights were not only fear, sin, or drink. They were also filled with rhythm, the heartbeat of men who in darkness found harmony. Long before books were common, long before printing presses filled libraries, stories lived on the lips of men, and at night when work was done and fires burned low, they gathered in circles to tell them. These were the storytellers' circles, where truth and fantasy blended, where men escaped hunger, war, and sorrow by trading words. Picture a barn, its rafters heavy with hay. A circle of men sit cross-legged, mugs of ale in hand. The fire crackles, shadows dance. One man leans forward, eyes glinting, and begins once in the days when wolves spoke. The room falls silent. Each word becomes a rope binding the circle tighter. Storytellers told more than fairy tales. They recited battles, saints' miracles, kings' betrayals. They spun tales of ghosts haunting crossroads, of maidens cursed, of treasures buried under oak roots. For men who rarely traveled beyond their village, stories were windows to worlds larger than their own. And each telling was an event, shaping memory and imagination alike. Science today calls this narrative bonding. Shared stories build empathy, linking minds in common pictures. To medieval men it was enchantment. A tale well told could make them forget empty stomachs, aching limbs, or the weight of taxes. It could make them laugh until tears flowed, or shiver as though death itself hovered behind them. Imagine yourself there. The storyteller pauses, letting the silence stretch. Do you lean closer, eager for the next word? Do you interrupt with a joke, testing the teller's patience? Or do you sit still, caught in the spell, barely breathing as the tale weaves around you? Comedy thrived in these circles. Men parodied their neighbors, making farmers heroes who fought dragons with turnips, or mocking lords who slipped on pig dung. Laughter rang louder than firewood cracking, binding the men in shared mischief. Even priests and kings, untouchable by day, could be mocked safely in story. But there was danger too. Some stories carried forbidden truths, criticisms of rulers, questions about God. A storyteller who strayed too far risked accusations of heresy or rebellion. And yet the circles endured, because men needed the freedom to imagine a world different from their own. In many circles, stories became ritual. Men swore to pay the tale with another, so the chain never broke. Others demanded tokens, a coin, a drink, or even a favor, in exchange for a story. To withhold was to break the circle's magic. When dawn broke, the tales ended, but echoes lingered. Men carried them into fields, forges, and battlefields, repeating them until they became part of legend. The storytellers' circles remind us, medieval nights were not only lived but imagined, and in those circles, men found freedom no law could grant. Not every confession in the Middle Ages happened before a priest. Some happened under the moon, whispered between men who trusted each other more than the church. These were the moonlit confessions, nights when secrets poured out like wine, when guilt and fear were shared to make them bearable. Picture a meadow at midnight, dew clinging to grass. A small fire burns low, just enough to keep the chill away. Men sit in a loose circle, cloaks wrapped tight, mugs in hand. One speaks haltingly at first about stealing grain to feed his family. Another admits he envies his lord, hates him even. A third confesses to fear, to doubts about God. The circle listens, not judging, but nodding, murmuring, sharing their own burdens in turn. Confession was supposed to be sacred, sealed by priests, but many men mistrusted the church's authority, fearing judgment, fines, or worse. Among brothers, under stars, words felt safer. These circles became an underground form of therapy, centuries before the word existed. Science today recognizes the power of confession. Speaking fears aloud reduces their grip, sharing guilt creates solidarity. For medieval men, it was more than psychology, it was survival. Secrets left unspoken could fester into madness. Better to spill them into the night, where the moon itself seemed to absorb the weight. Imagine yourself there. The fire crackles, your turn comes. Do you admit to stealing, to lust, to doubt? Do you risk your companion's scorn? Or trust their silence will hold? Or do you keep the secret buried, letting it gnaw at your soul? The choice is yours, and each path carries its own torment. Comedy softened the weight. One man might confess to eating an entire loaf of bread meant for his family, earning groans and laughter. Another might admit he once mistook goat dung for berries, a shame that turned into a joke retold for years. These foolish confessions reminded men that not every burden was sin, some were simply human folly. But danger lingered. A confession overheard could become weapon. Enemies might use words to blackmail, lords to punish, priests to condemn. Trust was fragile, and yet men risked it because silence was heavier than betrayal. To speak was to gamble with loyalty. There were whispers. Two of darker confessions, men admitting to murder, heresy, or forbidden love. The fire burned low, voices hushed, as though the night itself leaned closer. In those moments the circle was no longer just men. It was jury, priest, and witness all at once. When dawn came, the confessions ended, but the bond remained. Men rose lighter, as though guilt had been carved away by words. They carried their burdens into daylight. But now they carried them together. The moonlit confessions remind us truth does not always belong to altars or judges. Sometimes it belongs to fire. To friends, to the silence between stars. And in the medieval night, to confess was not only to admit weakness, it was to be human. Not every man in the Middle Ages sought danger, sin, or revelry when darkness fell. Some lay still, gazing into the fire or the stars, letting dreams carry them farther than their feet ever could. These were the dreamers of the night, men who turned silence into journeys, who wandered not with boots but with imagination. Picture a peasant in a straw bed, his body aching from labor. His hut smells of smoke and wool, the wind rattles the shutters, but his mind drifts elsewhere. He imagines himself a knight, armor gleaming, riding into battles sung by minstrels. Another man, a shoemaker, lies awake dreaming not of glory but of a better life. More bread for his children, fewer debts, a wife who smiles instead of sighs. Dreams, even quiet, were acts of defiance. The medieval night was long. Candles and torches were costly, so most homes lay in darkness. In those hours men turned inward. They spoke of dreams to friends at dawn. Strange visions of angels, omens of storms, or nonsense that drew laughter. Dreams were treated as messages, warnings, or sometimes as entertainment. Science today tells us REM sleep shapes memory, consolidates emotions, and spins fragments into surreal stories. For medieval men, dreams were sacred letters from God or tricks of demons. To dream was to receive a secret, and to share it was to give others a glimpse into mystery. Imagine yourself there, you wake in the night. Sweat on your brow, heart pounding. You saw something, an angel with wings of fire, or a beast with a man's face. Do you tell your companions, risking their laughter? Do you keep it close, fearing it foretells doom, or do you dismiss it even as it gnaws at you through the day? Comedy softened the terror of dreams. Men joked about visions of endless feasts, only to wake to empty bowls. A farmer once claimed he dreamt of kissing the queen, earning roars of laughter and mock knighthood from his friends. Dreams gave material not only for prophecy but for play. But darker tales endured. Some men swore dreams drove them mad, haunted by the same nightmare of fire or death night after night. Others claimed demons pressed on their chests, choking them in sleep, the phenomenon we now call sleep paralysis. To them, the dream world was not escape but battlefield, yet even nightmares bound men. Around fires, they shared their visions, searching for meaning. A bad dream became warning for the group, urging caution on hunts or travels. A good dream gave hope, a fragile light in grim lives. The dreamers of the night remind us, imagination is as old as fear. In huts and castles alike, men closed their eyes and traveled. Some dreamed of saints, others of sin, but all revealed the hunger for more than the day allowed. In those fragile hours, the medieval night was not only endured. It was transformed into infinite worlds. The medieval night was not only for rest or revelry. Sometimes it was for testing. Rituals where men proved strength, faith, or courage in the cloak of darkness. These were the trials by darkness, challenges whispered about in villages, feared and craved in equal measure. Picture a ruined chapel on a hill, its stones cold, roof broken. A group of men gather at midnight, torches flickering. A young man stands apart, eyes wide. He has been dared or ordered to spend the night inside alone. If he endures, he earns honor, perhaps a place in the brotherhood. If he flees, he is mocked as coward forever. The door creaks shut, the night swallows him. Trials by darkness came in many forms. Some were games of courage, walking alone through cemeteries, touching a skull, or sleeping atop a grave. Others were rites of passage, apprentices sent into the woods without fire, soldiers tested by patrols at midnight, boys becoming men by confronting fear. In all cases, the dark was more than backdrop, it was the opponent. Science now tells us fear of the dark is primal, rooted in survival instincts. Predators hunt at night, and the human eye falters in shadow. For medieval men, darkness was not just absence of light, it was alive, filled with spirits, demons, and dangers unseen. To face it was to wrestle with more than fear. It was to wrestle with belief itself. Imagine yourself in that chapel. The wind moans through cracks. A rat scurries, its claws echoing like footsteps. Shadows stretch across the walls. Do you pray, clutching your amulet? Do you sing to keep your courage? Or do you tremble, every creak convincing you the dead stir nearby? Comedy sometimes eased the edge. Men would dare each other to howl like wolves, or sneak into the trial site to scare the initiate. One story tells of a baker's son locked in a crypt, only to scream when his friends tossed bread loaves through the bars, convinced ghosts were hurling bones. Such tricks made the ordeal both terrifying and ridiculous. But the stakes could be deadly. Some trials ended in panic so severe that men fled into woods, freezing or falling to beasts. Others left scars. Burns from fires set for light, wounds from unseen hazards. Yet communities valued them, believing fear faced in darkness forged strength for life. Some believed the trials revealed destiny. If a man survived, it meant he was chosen, blessed by spirits who allowed him to walk unharmed. If he failed, it was fate exposing weakness. In this way, the trial became not only test but prophecy. When dawn broke, survivors emerged pale, eyes hollow yet proud. The village welcomed them with cheers or jeers, depending on their endurance. For those who endured, the memory lingered forever. The night when they stared into shadows and found themselves, the trials by darkness remind us. Medieval men did not only live in fear of night, they used it. They shaped it into a crucible, where courage was measured not by sword or coin, but by the ability to stand in silence, surrounded by the unknown, and endure. Every medieval village and city had gates, and every gate had its watchers. These men did not celebrate or confess, gamble or sing. They kept vigil through the night, standing between their community and the dangers of the dark. For them, the night was not leisure. It was labor, duty, and sometimes terror. Picture a wooden gate flanked by stone towers. The torches sputter in the wind, casting weak light on the road beyond. Two men stand wrapped in cloaks, spears in hand, eyes straining at shadows. Every rustle could be thief, wolf, or worse. Behind them lies the village asleep, trusting that these watchers will hold the line. To watch the gates was more than guard duty. It was ritual. At sunset, men swore oaths, touched relics or crosses, and took their posts. Their task was sacred, to protect life within from death without. Yet the monotony was crushing. Hours dragged, feet numbed, eyes burned. To stay awake was itself a trial. Science today might call this hyper-vigilance, the brain straining under fatigue, imagining threats in every shadow. For medieval men, such visions were real. Many swore they saw ghosts drifting along roads, or demons crouched at the hedges. The dark was enemy as much as any soldier. Imagine yourself there. The night is cold, your spear heavy. Do you pace, muttering prayers to keep fear at bay? Do you stare fixedly at the road, every movement a threat? Or do you drift, risking sleep, knowing your village lies unguarded? If you falter, comedy found cracks even here. Guards pranked each other with whispers, "Did you hear that?" Or threw pebbles to spark false alarms. One story tells of a watcher so frightened by an owl's hoot that he rang the alarm bell, rousing the entire town, only to be mocked for weeks. These blunders lightened the burden, turning fear into laughter. But danger was never absent. Raiders struck at night, scaling walls or forcing gates. Wolves prowled near villages, and once inside they ravaged livestock. Some watchers were killed at their posts, their sacrifice remembered only in brief prayers. To stand at the gates meant to risk death silently, without song or cheer, and yet there was pride. The watchers carried the trust of all who slept behind the walls. When dawn broke and the gates opened to trade, the men stepped aside, weary but honored, knowing they had carried the night. The watchers at the gates remind us medieval nights were not only filled with secrets and rituals, they were also kept at bay by ordinary men, standing in cold silence, holding spears, guarding lives. Their ritual was not spectacular, but without it, none of the other night rituals could exist. Not every medieval man found his place in taverns, fields, or circles of friends. Some abandoned villages altogether, seeking solitude in caves and forests. These hermits of the night turned their backs on noise, choosing darkness as companion. Their rituals were not of dice, fire, or song, but of silence, hunger, and visions. Picture a cave mouth on a rocky hillside, the moonlight spilling across jagged stone. Inside, a man kneels on bare earth, cloaked in rags. A single candle flickers, casting shadows that twist like spirits. He whispers prayers not to be heard by others, but to carve their echo into the stone and into himself. The cave swallows his voice, giving nothing back but stillness. Hermits were not rare in the Middle Ages. Some were holy men, retreating to seek God away from sin. Others were fugitives, exiles, or men broken by grief who chose silence over society. At night their solitude became ritual. They fasted, prayed, or endured the cold until visions came. Science today might explain such visions as hallucinations born of isolation, hunger, and exhaustion. The brain, deprived of company and comfort, weaves voices and lights to fill the void. For medieval hermits, though, these were revelations. Angels, demons, or even Christ himself were believed to appear in caves, granting wisdom no village could offer. Imagine yourself there. The cave is damp, your stomach empty, the night air biting your skin. Do you pray louder, begging for a sign? Do you give in to fear, fleeing back to human voices? Or do you stay, letting silence wrap you until your mind bends into vision? Comedy flickered even in such solemn lives. Travelers sometimes mocked hermits for their ragged clothes, joking that they smelled worse than goats. One tale tells of a hermit who, after months of silence, finally shouted, not in prayer but in rage, at a squirrel stealing his bread. These stories, half tragic and half absurd, spread across villages as reminders that even holy solitude had cracks of foolishness. But there was danger too. Hermits risked starvation, wild beasts, or madness. Some never returned, their bones found years later curled in caves like relics of forgotten faith. Yet others became legends. Villagers visited them for blessings, advice, or cures, believing their solitude gave them power. In this way, the hermit's ritual was not private at all. It became part of the wider community's night. When dawn crept, the hermit did not leave his cave. He had no village to return to. His vigil stretched from night into day and from one day into years. For him, the night was not interruption but eternity. The hermits in the caves remind us medieval men sought meaning in many ways, some through laughter, some through danger, some through love, but others sought it in silence, in the raw company of stone and darkness. Their rituals were strange, harsh, and lonely, but in them burned the oldest human desire, to touch something beyond the world of men. Knighthood was not only forged in tournaments and on battlefields, it was also shaped in silence, in vows whispered beneath the moon. For medieval knights, the night offered a canvas for oaths too personal or dangerous to swear before crowds. These midnight vows bound men not by law, but by honor and fear of breaking faith with the unseen. Picture a ruined chapel on the edge of a forest. A handful of men kneel before an altar cracked with age, swords laid across their knees. A single candle flickers, its flame bending in the draught. One knight presses his hand to the hilt and whispers a vow: to protect a lord, to avenge a brother, to love a woman forbidden by marriage. The others bow their heads in silence, for they too carry vows unfit for daylight. Knights were bound by codes, loyalty, chastity, courage, but reality often clashed with these ideals. Midnight vows were ways of reconciling contradictions. A knight might swear to God and king by day, but to a lover or cause by night. In this, the medieval night became courtroom and confessional both. Science today might call this cognitive dissonance, the strain of holding conflicting beliefs. For knights, it was survival. They lived between ideals of chivalry and the brutal needs of war, between loyalty to lords and loyalty to self. Midnight vows gave them space to be both idealists and men of flesh. Imagine yourself there. The stone floor chills your knees, the sword weighs heavy on your palms. Do you vow vengeance, risking damnation? Do you swear love, though it binds you to secrecy forever? Or do you stay silent, fearing that even the night remembers broken oaths? Comedy sometimes found its way into these solemn rites. Chronicles tell of squires stumbling over words, swearing loyalty to the wrong lord in nervous panic, or a knight so drunk he promised eternal chastity, only to curse himself the next morning. Such blunders were retold for years, softening the edge of ritual with laughter. But the vows could cut deep. Men who swore vengeance sometimes abandoned reason, chasing feuds until they died. Others who vowed loyalty beyond sense found themselves betraying kingdoms for the sake of private promises. Midnight vows carried no witness but God, yet their weight was heavier than crowns. Some knights believed their vows altered destiny. To speak under moonlight was to carve words into fate itself. They fasted before swearing, cut their palms for blood, or placed hands on relics stolen from shrines. Each gesture turned vow into covenant, binding their souls beyond death. When dawn came, the knights dispersed, their vows sealed in silence. No record remained, yet the consequences unfolded in wars, duels, and tragedies that followed. The knights' midnight vows remind us power is not only forged in steel but in whispers. In the medieval night, men carried secrets sharper than swords, binding themselves to loves, feuds, and dreams that daylight could not bear. Every night has an ending, and in the Middle Ages, the final hour before dawn was its own kind of ritual. It was the moment when men, exhausted from their secrets, games, and prayers, felt both the weight of darkness and the promise of light. In that fragile hour, the medieval night revealed its truest face, a mirror of men's fears, longings, and courage. Picture a village still half asleep. The tavern has gone silent, its revelers sprawled in hay or on benches, the guards at the gates yawn, shifting their spears as the first pale line of sky appears. In barns and huts, men stir from straw beds, rubbing eyes, muttering half-remembered dreams. The fire pits glow faintly, embers sighing as if tired from the night's work. For some, the last hour was relief. Surviving the night meant surviving danger, thieves, beasts, spirits, or sins. For others, it was sorrow, because daylight meant returning to labor, to hunger, to debts. The night was freedom, but dawn was duty, and so men lingered in those final minutes, stretching time before the day could reclaim them. Science today speaks of circadian rhythms, the body preparing for wakefulness as the sky brightens. But medieval men read omens instead. A rooster crowing early could mean misfortune. A mist rising from the fields might warn of illness. Every detail of dawn became message, a reminder that even endings spoke in symbols. Imagine yourself there. The horizon glows faint pink. Do you sigh in relief, grateful you endured the night? Do you dread the day, wishing darkness could last longer? Or do you stand between both, feeling the strange peace of transition, as if caught between two worlds? Comedy colored the dawn too. Drunken men stumbled home, tripping over chickens. Farmers cursed their roosters for crowing too soon, threatening them with pots. One tale tells of a shepherd so tired he fell asleep while opening the pen, only to wake chased by his own sheep. The final hour was weary, but never without foolishness. Yet the darker truths lingered. Some men never saw the dawn, killed in brawls, taken by fever, lost on roads. Their absence weighed heavily in the first light. When companions counted who had made it through, dawn was not just relief but reckoning. Still, the final hour carried hope. The medieval night, with all its secrets, its gamblers and lovers, healers and hermits, confessors and knights, always gave way to morning. No matter how deep the dark, the sun returned, promising another chance. That was perhaps the greatest ritual of all, to endure the night and rise again. The final hour before dawn reminds us men of the Middle Ages were not so different from us. They feared shadows, sought laughter, longed for love, and dreamed of more. Their nights were harsh, but in them burned the same fragile light we carry still, the hope that when dawn comes we will be ready. And so our journey through the secret night rituals of medieval men comes to an end. If you have listened this far, thank you. Your time is the most precious gift, and I am honored you have spent it here, wandering with me through the shadows of history. Before we part, I would love to hear from you. Which of these midnight rituals surprised you the most? The gamblers risking everything, the knights swearing vows, the hermits in their caves, or the dreamers who traveled only in their minds? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which ritual you would dare to join, or which one you would never survive, and if there is a secret of history you would like me to uncover next. Let me know. Your ideas shape where this journey goes. Until then, rest well, dream deeply, and remember, the night still holds stories waiting for those brave enough to listen.